Hello my darling, so lovely to see you here again. Welcome to my ASMR. I'm still very new to this, and if you've just come across this YouTube channel, this is my TikTok and this is my Instagram. It would be lovely if you could join me on those platforms. If you follow me already, thank you for being here. Your support is everything. I would love to add that if you would like to book me on CAMEO, I'd be more than thrilled to make you some personalised content, whether it be a positivity message, a personalised goodnight message, or simply a happy birthday to you or a friend. So if you'd like to book me on CAMEO, I have a very, very low price, and the link should be in the description box down below. Now, without further ado, let's get reading. Chapter 1, An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened on a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel, without smoke, with panelled walls and the floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles around called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows looking over his garden and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. This hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, and not only because most of them were rich, but also because they had never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbours' respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary, everyday sort which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a lot of noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes because their feet grow natural leathery soles and thick warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly. They have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh, deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was of course absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a members of the Took clan would go and have adventures, they discreetly disappeared and the family hushed it up. But the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father. He built the most luxurious Hobbit Hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill, or over the hill, or across the water. And there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his makeup from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived, until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful Hobbit Hole built by his father, which I've just described for you, till he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance one morning long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed. Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you had only heard a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place, wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on businesses of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat and a long grey cloak, and a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning, whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good on this morning, or that this morning is good to be on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco outdoors, into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, do sit down and take a fill of mine. There's no hurry, we have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it is very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so in these parts. We are plain, quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them," said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He decided that he was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the hobbit without saying anything, until Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you do use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good until I move off." Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see, I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name." responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves or sailing ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. Where else would I be? Said the wizard, at any rate. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your grandfather took sick, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have, twice now. My pardon. I give it you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, and very good for you, and profitable too. Very likely if you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today, good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow, goodbye. And with that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside its round green door, and shut it quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. What on earth did I ask him to tea for, he said to himself, as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. After a while he stepped up, and with the spike of his staff, scratched a queer sign on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day he'd almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well, unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this: Gandalf tea Wednesday. Yesterday he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put the kettle on, and put another cup and saucer and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. I am so sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, and when he saw that it was not Gandalf at the door at all, it was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright-coloured eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and Dwalin at your service, he said with a low bow. Bilbo Baggins at yours, said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I am just about to take tea. Pray, come and have some with me. A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things in your hall without a word of explanation? They had not been at the table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another, even louder ring at the doorbell. Excuse me, said the hobbit, and off he went to the door. So you have got here at last. That's what he was going to say to Gandalf this time. But it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step, with a white beard and a scarlet hood. And he, too, hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited. I see they have begun to arrive already, he said, when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood and hanging up. He hung his red one next to it and said, Balin, at your service. He said with his hand on his breast. Thank you, said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they have begun to arrive. Had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then, as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painful, that he might have to go without. Come along in and have some tea, he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better, if it is all the same to you, my good sir, said Balin with the white beard. But I don't mind some cake, seed cake if you have any. Lots, Bilbo found himself answering to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off to the cellar to fill a pint of beer mug, and then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes which he had baked that afternoon for his supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them when a loud ring came at the door again, and then another ring. see, said Keely. Let us join the throng. Throng, thought Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I must really sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink. He'd only just had a sip in the corner while the four dwarves sat round at the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous, when ding-dong-a-ling-dang, his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. Someone at the door, he said, blinking. Some four, I should say, by the sound, said Feely. Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance. The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang again, louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying at your service one after another. Dory, Nori, Ori, Oin and Gloin were their names. And very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some for water, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes. So the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had been set in the hearth, the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarves were starting on a round of buttered scones, where there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a rat-a-tat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage very angry and altogether bewildered and bewildered that this was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he'd put there the morning before. Carefully, carefully, he said. It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a popgun. Let me introduce Biffa, Boffa, Bomber, and especially Thorin. At your service, said Biffa, Boffa, and Bomber standing in row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin. An enormously important dwarf, in fact no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Biffa, Boffa, Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very hofty, and said nothing about serving, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. Now, we are all here, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me. And for me, said Thorin. And raspberry jam, apple tart, said Biffa. And mince pies and cheese, said Boffa. And pork pie and salad, said Bomber. And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind, called the other dwarfs through the door. Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow, Gandalf called after him, as the hobbit stomped off to the pantries, and just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my larders than I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things all piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and very red in the face and annoyed. Confuster came to bother these dwarves, he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, Feely and Keely behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool. At the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite suppose you will all stay to supper, he said in his politest of pressing tones. Of course, said Thorin, and after we shan't get through the businesses till late, we must have some music first. Now, to clear up. Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, but balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, with one hand, while the hobbit ran after almost all of them, squeaking in fright, "Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage." But the dwarves only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a thumping bowl. And when you've finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully, carefully with the plates. And I'm going to leave this here. I just can't do the full chapter. I'm running out of memory space. But, again, like I said, I'm working on it for you, and I really hope you're probably snoozing away by now. So what I'm saying is probably very irrelevant, but thank you so much for being here. You are so special to me.